just even off like the demo tape was like this idea that, especially now doing this project, but even at the time, I feel like I had this idea that I never even questioned until now. I'm thinking about it more, like whatever. Is that they seemed like they were like together,
Uh-huh.
like like they're stuck on this mountain. They're like, someone come and rescue us!
Oh, uh-huh.
Like they're like. It's just so ridiculous. Like this is huge music and these like
Yeah.
high pitched
Yeah.
voices of calling out for rescue. I don't know.
There may have been something to that. Come and rescue us.
But aside from the production, what did you see like in the differences between like almost comparing like mustaches to self-titled LP?
Um, Musically, it seemed to be. I don't know much about music. It seemed like they were just getting deeper and heavier. And the shows around the time of self-titled were just so impressive. Like, um, it just kept getting more carp-like. And you'd think that you'd get bored of it, but you never did. It was every show, it was just like jaw-dropping. I don't want to get too deep into this whole hyperbole, but very, just there was a lot of beauty.
What was your impression of the kind of like the journey or the progression that they went through as people, like from the beginning to towards the end?
It was, I think it was really hard. I think it was really hard for Jared to try to. Felt like it was a lot of pain trying to keep it together and keep. It was very frustrating, I think. They got really frustrated. It was like after they stopped playing for a while, and it was like Scott wasn't playing at all. You know, he wasn't playing at all, and it was like it felt like, well, he could be playing drums for anybody, anywhere. He could just be constantly in demand as a drummer. He could just play with whoever he wanted and easily make a living as a drummer, playing for bands that are, you know, successful or popular or even just working. But he didn't want to, you know? That was the thing. It's like he played with Clark because he wanted to. It was fun. And playing drums necessarily, it wasn't necessarily fun. It was playing drums with those people was fun. And then there was years when at one point, Devon Narcotic Sound System, the band I was playing with, in '98, our drummer left, Larry. He decided he was going to really commit himself to driving a forklift. And so we were about to leave on tour, about to put out an album, leave on tour, needed a drummer, and I called up Scott because someone's like, well, why don't you ask Scott? Maybe Scott could play with you. And because there was definitely an element to Carp that this is where I think they were most similar to the Melvins, is in the drumming, in that the rhythm it wasn't necessarily just a jackhammer rhythm going on. There was an underlying groove that was very sophisticated, and so I was really excited about the idea of playing with Scott. But I also had this thing in my mind that was like, he's not going to play with me. He's not going to want to play with us. Because why would he? And, you know, I was, I wanted to play with Scott, but also we needed a drummer. So I called him up and asked him. And he's like, no. I mean, he wasn't rude or whatever. He's just like, he didn't want to. And that was cool. I totally understood. So, yeah, it seemed like he played drums with Carp because he wanted to play drums with Carp. And it was years before he started playing with somebody else. And that was like big news. Scott's playing drums again. And it was like, okay, where? I want to be there. And then Scott's playing with Jared. And that was like, why did it take so long? Oh well, at least it's happening. Let's not worry about it. So.
Yeah, when Scott and Jared started playing together, like what does that mean to you and you guys? Like, what's the significance of that? Because it's not really just like, oh, these two guys are, isn't that nice, right?
No, it was like it was like confirmed. Okay, the world isn't such a horrible place. Scott and Jared are playing together again. Yes. There's a reason. Could there be a God?
Because what was your impression of that time period preceding what you just described and post band breaking up? Like what it seemed like for them.
Well, when Chris had he had a lot of problems that I'm sure you could talk to Audrey about that, and Chris and Audrey had gotten together was really good. I felt like that was going to be a really good thing. But then when he went to the hospital, all this stuff came out that we had no idea about Chris. We didn't realize that he'd had so many problems, and some of them were mental issues that he had. Some of them were substance related, and this was a big shock to people people who felt really, really close to him. And yeah. So there was a period where everyone was like, well, Chris needs us, and everyone felt like they needed to reach out to Chris and to the band, and the band, they had a long time off, and then when they kind of got back together and got going again, it was really great. And I think it was Yo-Yo, when they played Yo-Yo that one time, and it was the last time they played Yo-Yo, it was like, wow, this is it. Yes. And then, they did the thing that Carp usually does, which is go on tour, get a couple weeks into it, and then but that time it was the last time, which is, yeah.
Now, when you originally, like, these things that you were just describing were kind of revealed to you, and there was this shock, like, oh, that's a lot more than I knew was going on. Did you think, like, I'm just curious because I was just putting this together from what you were saying, because you were telling us earlier about Chris being so concerned for Mike.
Yeah.
Did you think about that at all, or like?
Oh yeah, I was shocked. I was completely shocked. I mean, this is just like stupid gossip, but I couldn't believe it because he had been so. He just had given the impression that drug abuse was not something that was of interest to him at all, and so we had no idea that this had been going on. But then yeah.
Now, this kind of suggests, it's being suggested that, like, this is something that he's supposed to be hiding. Like, according to his peer group, right? Like, Scott and Jared wouldn't have improved.
I don't know. I, it's possible that I don't know if that was a factor to Chris, but before the the drug thing didn't come out until much later. There was a period. It was dealing with him being in the hospital and then being home, and having it revealed that there was all this world that we didn't know about, that Chris was really concerned about nuclear war, and didn't want to go outside because of fear about things, about fearing for his safety, and just a lot of mental issues that he had been keeping from everyone, his family and his people that knew him really well didn't know that he had these concerns. And so there was a whole other world inside Chris's mind that we weren't aware of, and yeah.
You know, like these
So
guys,
what all I mean by that is that whether that the drug use was, him not telling about the drug use was consistent with him not telling about other issues that were going on in his world that people weren't aware. Yeah. Have you talked to Adam Shea at all?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
Because
totally.
he was definitely there a lot for that, and he knew Chris really well, better than anyone probably at that point.
Yeah, totally. I just flew out of my mind what I was gonna say.
Have you ever talked to Jason Traeger?
No.
Oh, because he worked with both Jared and Chris
Mm-hmm.
with the developmentally disabled sex offenders and stuff like that, and yeah, he was pretty good friends with them and stuff. But at one point, Jared had to fire Chris because different things. Ryan Suter, you know Ryan Suter?
Mm-mm.
Oh well. Anyway, yeah. Ryan went on tour with Carp, I think, once or twice, with fits of depression as well. Yeah, might be a good person to talk to.
Ryan.
Ryan Suter, yeah.
Ryan Suter.
I think he moved back to Olympia. He was
Right,
living in
yeah.
Portland for a long time. Suter, Sutagher.
And I also remembered what I was thinking was that when these kind of things were coming out about concerns Chris had and ways in which he could probably need to be cared for by his friends, right? We're still talking about young kids.
Well, he
Right?
was young. He was he was 21, 22. I don't know how old he was actually, but he was relatively young still, and the Peanuts mentality still was taking over. The idea that, well, we can take care of him. And I think when he left the hospital, they were like really saying, this is not a good idea for you to leave. You need professional help. And he and Audrey were like, well, we can handle it. They had this idea that we can face this together, and Chris's family and people were like, we can work on it. But the idea that they still had this mentality that, like, we can take on the world, we can solve all our problems. It was very consistent with the idea of, well, drop out of high school, be in a band, play the Capitol Theater, backstage.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because that's much like Jared described it. You know, like it seems so ridiculous now as adults. You
Uh-huh.
know that he was just like, yeah, sure. Well, then after this happens, we just go on tour. We're all just pile in a van and like tear out
Uh-huh.
across the country. So do you think that did this change things for Carp?
Which,
This ev- this event.
oh yeah. Well, I mean, things got difficult, hard to deal with. You know, it's it was perhaps the hardest part was that they to to ever admit that it was larger than they could deal with. Yeah. Uh, and yeah, it's like I felt, yeah, it's um, it was like everyone was playing band, this game called band, and um, and it was fun for a while, and then and you know it's always fun till somebody gets hurt, and and then you realize, oh, so the world is a lot more complicated than it appeared. Our world is a lot more complicated than yours.
So then what happens next? Or I guess what ultimately um, happens? Like, how does this scenario ravel out? You know what I mean?
Well, they committed themselves to being a band. I think after Chris felt like he was back on track. This is what he made a decision. Okay, being in Carp is important to me. I'm going to get myself together because it's not just that I'm having fun playing with my friends, but I want to do this band because I feel like it's important. And it's important to all of us, and we're going to commit to it. And they were going to like really go for it. Not like we're going to make it, but we're going to really be the best Carp that we can be. And it seemed like they made that decision as a group. I mean, I'm just extrapolating from, no one said this to me. It just seemed as though that's what was going on. That they decided, let's really do this the best that we can do, and work hard. And that's when they decided they were going to try working with Up and do their next record on Up. And then they went on tour and everything. But it was almost as if it was like occupational therapy. Okay, I'm going to commit to this band as a way to solve some of my problems, and it but the it may have helped solve the problems, but they didn't immediately go away. And I think that was the factor that maybe hadn't been taken into consideration. But you know, they're very optimistic people, so they were like, "We can do this," and there's a lot of beauty in that.
Right, because it's even a stretch to say that that's how they've been solving their problems
Uh-huh.
since high school, and it had been working. Right.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
Um, okay. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. So, post accident, mishap, what have you, there's a show, right? Like an incredibly emotional show people have told me about where they're, is this right? Like where they're back and people weren't sure if they were going to be back, and it was
Mm.
just like I've had people describe it to me as just this like incredibly heavy event for friends and
Oh,
people that were there. Do you remember this show or?
you know, I don't remember exactly. Exactly. If I had more of the details, I remember. I do remember that that happened. I don't remember the exact event like that, but there's a lot of relief too, though. Like, okay, it's working.
So you're talking about, they kind of like try to gain center again and right themselves and continue on.
Uh-huh.
Um, then what?
Well, they started recording for Up, and they put out the single and all that, and yeah, I think that the combination of personalities, the way they were at that time, it just wasn't going to work. And just maybe, I don't know, I wasn't there, but maybe they decided it wasn't fun anymore. Maybe, yeah.
What was your sense of what had changed ultimately?
Well, Chris, it seemed as though Chris was unstable in a way that it was difficult for Scott and Jared to manage, to deal with. And they're not, they said they wanted to, be in a band with Chris. They didn't have any professional training on as therapists or anything else. So counseling or anything. So, but I'm not the person to talk to about this. I don't really know. I'm just extrapolating from what I witnessed and stuff. The person to talk to would be Jared or Scott. They would know. Or if they remember, they may not even want to remember. I don't know. I don't know what Chris would say.
And how did you just kind of feel about the news, like when you were like, oh, and you see that, you know, it, when it's the time that you do believe that, like, okay, this is it.
You mean this is the end of Carp?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it seemed obvious that this really was the end of Carp because Jared you can't just beat your head against the wall forever. And, yeah, it wasn't. It just wasn't working.
Do you have an impression of just since knowing them as friends and having a relationship with them for a long time? Did you have any sense of what you thought maybe it might have been like for them, like personally, to like get to the point where they're like, oh, we can play again together?
Uh-huh. It seemed really important to them, because they were important to each other, and to be able to do this thing together was meaningful to them. and the place that they there were people outside of Olympia who liked carp, but in my opinion, there were never as many as there should have been, and but in Olympia, they definitely had a place where people, they were important to people in Olympia. So they may have felt, in one sense, they may have felt that they were letting people down by not playing, and that by playing again, they were able to fulfill this obligation almost. Not that it wasn't enjoyable to them, but I think they did feel like there were people counting on them, and they didn't want to let them down.
Right, because just because it might be something you're counting on yourself to do,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean or not mean that other people aren't also counting on you to do it, perhaps.
Yeah.
Did you have any impression of what it must have been like on a personal level for Jared to go through the experience that he had to with Scott's death at the end of the whip?
Yeah, that was horrible. I think, well, it seemed really important to Jared that he was playing with Scott again. It seemed like he seemed very, it wasn't just a band, you know? It was real. And it was clearly devastating, you know? And we had the memorial service up at the studio there at the Olympia Knitting Mill, and Jared was a big part of organizing that. And he, in the end, he didn't really make a he didn't end up doing as much with it as he had originally planned, I think. And he was sort of making excuses about it. Oh, well, there's so many people, and people need to go. But I think also he felt so overwhelmed that he didn't feel like he could do any more publicly. Yeah. But people were very supportive of him, and it was good.
It's interesting in the sense that, like, what we were just talking about, like, you have this very, like, you know, like primeval connection with some people,
Mm-hmm.
and it gets disrupted, and you have to kind of, like, journey into yourself and
Mm-hmm.
figure that out in order to reconnect again, and then it happens again.
Uh-huh.
So, like, actually, I have just one or more questions for you, but I guess, like, what do you think about that? I mean, when you look and